I'd like to shift focus a little bit now and look at some public
examples
partnerships that have worked well. And Eric, I'm going to come to you first. Is there a gold standard in the way of working? And are there some examples that you can share with us where it's really worked well that you think are just sort of that kind of close to that gold standard?
So I'm not sure if I can well describe a gold standard, but I just wanted to bring something back that Nadia touched on, was the co-creation bit. And I think if you do a public-private partnership and you do that with a co-creation mindset, you get so much further. It's not trying to dictate something. I think it's something that it's an adventure that you step into together, and you have a vision. And vision is typically to these in the public-private partnerships that I've been exposed to, have been involved in, is about improving care holistically. And I think that's also something that Nadia touched about. So you not only look from the treatment of the disease with either medicinal products, but you look at everything, including the family around it, the caregivers, friends, and everything, because there's a mental health aspect often involved when you're looking at a lot of rare diseases are very serious, that affects also the people that are surrounding the patient or the caregivers for that matter. So I think if that could be the gold standard, that you look at it from a co-creation point of view, you step in it with an open mindset, but you have the vision to collectively improve care. I think then you have let's say a good recipe for success, or to move the needle into a certain direction. And so if I then think about what I worked on in the past, and this is something that Sheila was also involved in, and a company that I previously worked for was in the area of amyotrophic lateral sclerosis or neuromotor disease, and for the people in the UK, was the ALS Coalition. And that was a public-private partnership between a company, and in the end there were several companies contributing. Patient organizations were involved, members of the European Parliament, of course, clinical experts were involved, but also organizations like the European Brain Council had an involvement. And I think that's also what Nadia was talking about, is you step outside rare diseases. So you look at the European Brain Council, of course, the first thing that comes to mind is Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. They look at much bigger diseases than diseases like ALS or Huntington's. So you also bring in that expertise. So you step outside of that rare disease cocoon. And I think what we saw happening with the ALS Coalition is together the ALS Coalition wrote a white paper on how to improve care, with a few questions of things that needed to be improved. There were some policy asks included in it. The white paper was then presented at a meeting at the European Parliament. Members of the European Parliament participated in the meeting, and I think what we didn't expect, what we hoped for, was that there was, at that meeting, it was announced that there would be an interparliamentary interest group, taking that also from the European Parliament to the next level. And I think that's when you see things pick up momentum. That's when people get involved from different angles, and do their own thing, so to say, within their own remit. And if that's how you set up your public-private partnership, then things can evolve very quickly. I think then you can start moving the needle in a very good way. And also you get media exposure. I think Nadia talked about that as well. You want to have media exposure because you want to raise disease awareness, but you also want to raise disease severity awareness, because in the case of ALS, a lot of people know ALS, but often do not fully understand the severity of the disease. We know it's a deadly disease very quickly, but what does it actually do with people, and how does the disease course look like? And how does it affect the people around them and the caregivers? And I think with a private partnership like the ALS Coalition, got a lot of exposure, got a lot of newspaper coverage and journal coverage. And I think that's when things really start to bubble almost. And that is, of course, for the benefit of the entire community.
Absolutely. And Sheila, to move on to the topic of sort of policy and pricing, how can we really stimulate innovation while also ensuring that we have value based on treatments and products for all stakeholders? What's your kind of observations on that?
That's a really interesting question, Nicola. I think we all want innovation. And I think for me, it's what innovation means to me and what innovation means to you are maybe two different things. So I think we need to kind of replace the word with innovation with something like, what do we want to achieve? What are the objectives? And it's not necessarily about innovation. For me, it's about moving the needle. It's about improving the landscape. Vicky and Nadia touched on the fact that, it's not just about new treatments. It's not, it's about non-traditional approaches of supporting people living with rare diseases, and also taking ourselves out of just this rare disease cocoon and moving into the kind of mainstream and really influencing policy there. So I think if we are looking at public-private partnerships, the ability to orientate and navigate through that allows us to think about, actually, how can we ensure that value that is created is valued by everyone? And by having those partnerships and having all of the people around the table, and as Nadia explained, co-creating, people can be explaining what value means to them in the context of that particular situation much more clearly. And the ALS coalition that we worked on, Eric and I, really enabled people to kind of share that from their perspective. So it wasn't, as Nadia said, a table that had already been laid and we invited people to attend. The actual table was created with all of the components, with all of the people at that table bringing their own dish or bringing their own ingredient to that conversation. And what that enabled people to do is, when it was presented in the European Parliament, as Eric said, the kind of impact that it made from a policy perspective and from an awareness perspective was probably something we hadn't expected. We were hoping, obviously, to make an impact, but it really enabled us to make a much bigger impact than we expected. And the awareness around ALS, the engagement of those wider communities became much more powerful. And we were able to then hook those value kind of messages into the wider policy landscape. So I think when we think about value and how we demonstrate it, those public-private partnerships can really ensure that everybody's perception or everybody's view on what is valuable to them in a particular initiative can really be brought to the fore, and then that builds together into an overall objective in a public-private partnership that can then actually be much more powerful and more impactful when you're trying to speak to policymakers, trying to think about the kind of other aspects that we're trying to influence here. And I think that really means that people feel like they've come on the journey, they've engaged in the journey, they've been part of the journey, and whatever the outcome, they also own it. Yeah. It's not being done to them and they're having to complain. They have to kind of take equal responsibility for whatever the outcome looks like. And it feels like, for me anyway, particularly in the ALS and into the Together for Rare Disease piece, is that there's much more, I'm trying to think of the right word. You feel more content because you've actually contributed and you've made the difference, as opposed to somebody saying we made the difference for you, which may or may not be valued.
And goes back to what Eric said as well at the start about that importance of transparency and managing expectations, isn't it? Like you said, about that common understanding of what value is for everybody, and it will be different, but having that meeting of minds on the topic. Thank you, Sheila. And Nadia, I mean, it's so exciting when hearing you talk earlier about, just how good it could be. And, obviously as an advocacy group working within this sphere, I'd really love to know what your kind of key learnings from your perspective of your role have been as to how you found the processes.
I'm going to take time to perhaps speak away from the whole science of things and really reflect on it as a caregiver, as a person, and as part of a larger patient group that's trying to advocate for something that started off as being quite unheard of, and the journey, of course, is never over. So earlier I did say that there's an importance of co-creation. The aim of that co-creation is to, I suppose, get to a space where there's shared ownership. And I think the challenge with rare disease very often is it's nobody's baby. Right? And in many countries and in many governments, there lacks the political will because it's deemed too expensive, too small a number to save, and we've got many other priorities. So the idea of co-creation here is extremely important because you want that shared ownership until it hurts to feel that this could be any one of us. It could be your neighbor, it could be yourself, it could be your significant other. It's sort of like one of those things where, I feel sad for you, but let's just switch channel. You want it to be a situation where they're not going to switch channel, because this is something that, has an emotional kind of attachment to it. So one of the things that I've learned along the way is, number one, we need to have our egos in check. And this is a big deal. It's not just about understanding the egos of the policymakers, of the body corporates, of the stakeholders, of the doctors. Let's face it, every single one of us have got subconscious biasness. Every single one of us have got our egos and our buttons of not to press and what to press. So I think it's extremely
I love that
important.
this is your first point. It's brilliant.
Because the point is, if you're talking about public-private partnerships, and in sustainability, we call it private partnerships for peace, right? You're not going to get there if you come onto the table thinking that you know more than others. And I think the whole entire thing has been a huge lesson and a re-lesson on humility for a lot of us, in understanding that while this is something that's extremely important for you, you have to be ready to understand that it might not be important for the person that you're talking to. And that's okay, because their starting point is different, their understanding is different, their life is different. So if you're going to go into that table like, an angry, we call it, that there are NGOs that are sort of like guerrilla warfare style. They come in and they complain and they're upset and they're angry. And then there are those that sell the pity story, we're going to die, please help us, we really need assistance. And then there are now more and more coming, look, we have a problem. The solution does not lie with me alone. It's something that we need to solve together, because you're going to be at stake as well if you don't help me, and I have something to offer. So that I have something to offer comes with realization that we're not just a beneficiary. We actually do have something to offer, that if you can help lower the bar and help get us through, more people in society are going to benefit just because you've been able to help the rare disease community. So that's something that I think is important. So one is the deep self-awareness and the egos in check, I think is extremely important. And with that comes with understanding when to choose your battles. Having to work with policymakers for years now and knowing that governments do change. You might have a fantastic advocate within the parliament this year, but oops, he's not chosen next year because it wasn't his party, or he was retiring, or ill health, or whatever the situation may be. And you find yourself repeating the same thing again, right? So it's absolutely necessary to be very mindful, very deliberate, very tactical on how you plan to engage your public-private partnership, even from the get-go, even from before starting. You need to know who's your quick win, who's your chances are you need more time to actually try and win over, who are let's just put them on the side, they're not going to agree. Because at the end of the day, patient groups are volunteers. More often than not, they're parents, caregivers with other jobs to do, and they're doing this out of the goodness of their heart, or because this is life for them, but it's a job for someone else. So that real realization that it's okay to not always win the battle, it's okay to say this PPP, after hindsight and checking through, I don't think this is right for us at this moment in time, is not a loss. It's probably a better decision and a wiser decision to step away from something that's going to major blow up or tank than go for it because they're a big funder. And I think MRDS has been consistent in that, understanding that even if we do want to go ahead with this partnership, is this partnership something that we ourselves can support and be an active partner in if we continue, knowing that even for us, our resources are finite. So that's, getting egos in check, choosing your battles, understanding. And the other thing, I think the importance of enablement rather than empowerment. One thing that I've realized is leading where you stand is extremely important. And I'll give you a case in point. Malaysia is an aging nation. And by 2056, we will be a super aged nation. And I know that this next statement that I'm going to give resonates with many of us here that's listening on this call. We will be aged caregivers caring for aging or aged loved ones with rare disease in an aging ecosystem that does not have adequate social safety nets or healthcare support to help us or our loved ones. This is real across the board, not special to Malaysia. It's in every country that I have actually studied. And I know it's sort of like, it's like a waterfall waiting to happen, right? You know you're going to get there eventually. So one of the things about enablement and leading where we stand is how can patient groups like us work together with body corporates, work together with other members in the stakeholder, so that there is that healthy ecosystem of succession planning for advocates, be it within the parliament or within pharma or within the family ecosystem, or siblings that will eventually step up to be the next generation of shadow board members of whatever national association that you belong to. Because one of the things that I've learned, and this is a key lesson learned, burnout is real. And caregiver fatigue is extreme. And anyone here listening to this, you know, you can give me a +1 or a thumbs up if you felt
They
it.
know, they know.
Many of us have gone through that, right? And it's multiple cycles of how long do I want to do this? And if you lose a loved one and they were the cause of you championing that particular rare disease, you know, once they're gone, you're going down palliative care, you're going down grieving, you're wondering, who am I after all this? Do I really want to continue down this route? Because I've been a champion in rare disease until the end of the term of my loved one. I mean, for the pharma colleague or for the policymaker, it's a job, right? They will continue. But for us, we're redefining ourselves as individual in that process. So that extreme humility and understanding that, you know, that burnout is real, and how we plan for succession planning within your public-private partnership is key. Because otherwise you'll find if you go or somebody else goes, that public-private partnership does not have the longevity that you require to see through the impact that you want. It will fizzle out and die before you hit finishing line, because you are expected to carry the metal, and it's no longer a baton passing marathon. It's sort of like a one person Ironman race. So it doesn't work that way. The other I want to highlight is what I've learned in Malaysia, definitely, is appreciating local wisdoms. And this is intergenerational, institutional, local wisdoms. Why I say that? Because I think someone mentioned in the chat and the question about, you know, understanding other forms of medicine. It could be, you know, alternative, it could be whatever that may be, Western science or our typical medical understanding of what works and what doesn't, right? In countries like ours, where we have indigenous populations, where we have populations that have their own set of local wisdoms, understandings, and norms. If you are a national association trying to create awareness on rare disease, and you're going into a kampong, a village in Borneo, and trying to say, hey, I'm from the capital city, this is what rare disease is, you can be sure that either the headman is going to say, thank you very much, bye Felicia, please leave, or you're going to find a situation where you're not going to be able to connect with the information that you need to deliver. So that importance of listening first in that PPP, and also being able to understand the local wisdoms and sensitivities in place, is what's going to enable you to develop that trust. And trust is that huge currency that you want to build when you're trying to talk about long-lasting PPPs.
So insightful there, Nadia. Thank you so much. I know that you've talked quite a lot there about, you know, things that can be done to get off on the right footing. Was there anything that you wanted to add to that, Sarah? I know Nadia covered quite a lot of that there, but was there anything you wanted to add to that before we move on?
I'm not sure I can cover much more, but I think I suppose just to kind of recap and emphasize some of those points. I think we've all talked about it, and I think there is this need for more open and honest conversations, which does mean leaving the ego at the door and making sure we're all very clear of what we want to get out of it. Because I think my experiences, and I'm sure everybody's, is you want to do so much for so many people. And I think there's got to be a pragmatism and an honesty about where you're starting the relationship and where you're going to take it in the longer term. And I think, you know, it sounds very simple. We'll get everybody around the table and we'll reach a common goal, but that takes a very honest dialogue, and that takes facilitation, negotiation, and it also takes understanding you've got the right people. Because even though you can identify people across disciplines and across industries, I mean, Nadia made a great point. We're in a cyclic position here in policy, in infrastructure, in where we are across different markets with different care systems. So, you know, we do really need to set the grounding right first for not only that one project, but also the longevity and sustainability. And I think, you know, and again, the co-creation piece is so important, but how you do that is also a bit of a communications technique, right? So we use a lot of design thinking workshops. So we actually identifying the right problem to get us to the right solution, because I think there is a tendency to hone in on some of those key areas, but actually there are other ways to tackle a problem and think about things creatively and looking at a different kind of point of view on things. So, and you know, the patient voice, I was smiling as everyone was discussing it, because it's such an industry cliche, right? It's, we're engaging with patient associations. And I was like, okay, how are we engaging with patient associations? How are we talking? How are we ensuring we understand the lived experiences? And how are we understanding that the outcomes of what we are committed to actually make a difference for those people now and also in the future? Because it's got to be seen as a strategic contribution, not just to get patient case studies, right? And I think we do it and we're on the start of the journey. There's a lot of positive work, but there's a lot more to do. And actually then, once you've even got the right people around the table, you've set your right goal, it's breaking that down into the pragmatic steps of what you're going to actually do over a period of time. And I think Eric touched on this. It's around those guardrails, not only from a compliance and influence perspective, but also how are we going to achieve it? What are the roles and responsibilities? How is somebody going to take the leadership role? How are decisions made? How do you manage your IP and your data? How do you make sure it's compliant? But also, more importantly, how do you measure success that has meaningful value for the people that are around that table? Because value, again, is a very loaded word. Value means different things to different people, and we need to start earlier in the process to define what that value is. You know, we've worked a lot and we've had so many discussions about PROs. How are we integrating those to make them more validated for better access and commercialization when we need it for those discussions with policymakers? So I think making sure they're meaningful metrics, and again, bit of a cliched industry word, but it's so important to be open and transparent about what those are and how we measure. But again, to my point of you can't boil the ocean, you've got to start small. So I think starting small on the right projects, building trust, even with pilots or in one market. But then the thing that we need to see more of is how do you ladder those up into bigger programs and more sustainable programs? How do we share the best practices? So putting in some kind of feedback mechanism or expansion mechanism to make sure those are real and sustainable and to build the trust and we can all learn from them, I think is another critical piece in the rare community.